Hello, everyone. Welcome to Scouting Session, episode 18. I'm Jérôme Birbe, and once again, I'm joined by Brad Allen. Hey, Brad, how's it going?
It's going good. Hey, we got best on best, and it was actually successful. We'll take it. We'll take it. It was beautiful. What an incredible tournament.
Yeah, awesome tournament. Like, I live in Montreal. Like, the city was pretty hype up for the first week of the tournament. So, like, awesome to see, like, best on best. But, Brad, today we are here to talk about the NHL draft. We just released our February list on hockeyprospect.com. Um, and let's talk about it, Brad. Maybe I'll just show the ranking on the screen here for our viewers, but maybe your take on the draft so far. It's almost March, and the draft is coming up really soon. A few months. I mean, 3 months from now, maybe for 3 months and a half, I guess. Um, so we have a lot of work left to do. But what's your feeling on this draft class this year so far?
Well, I'm sure, as most of you have been following the draft, are aware that this is not considered a very good class. And if you asked me even 2 months ago where it's at, I'd say it's probably still better in 2012 and 2019, but then definitely the worst draft after those two. When I mean 2012 and 2019, I mean like in hindsight. 2019 was expected, I think, to be a better class than this one a couple months ago, anyways. But then everybody in the top 20 is busting out in 2019, so that's why I think it's comparable now. Where 2012 was always historically considered terrible, and then ended up terrible. So a little different, but in terms of how poor this draft is, I think I think it's turning a corner. I think it's at least getting to the point where if the top end holds, like the top 10 to 12 kids in this draft hold, there is more depth now in the second and third rounds and even fourth rounds than I expected to see and find. I did an entire Euro sweep last 60 days, basically doing a Euro sweep, and pleasantly surprised. A lot more there than we expected. Some names never seen on lists, which is always good for us. Definitely think they're going to get drafted, and there's going to be some potential here. Now, I still think that this is not a good class overall. And what's interesting now, though, is that at least for any of you out there like Flyers fans, before I didn't know what Philly was going to do after the first round. Now, at least the second, third rounds, even fourth round, you might get something. I couldn't say that 2 months ago. However, this draft still has, to me, historical drop-off. Like when you're hitting the fifth round, when you hit around 50 on your list, the drop-off is remarkable. I will be shocked if more than 3 players from rounds 5 to 7 play out of this class. It is unreal, the drop in production. But it's hit its second battery life. It has hit a second battery. It's almost like Terminator 2 when T-1000 lances Arnie and Schwarzenegger's battery goes out and he has to reboot. That's this draft. We got to reboot, and that's what we want.
Yeah, I still think the top end of the draft is there's a lot of, you look at the top 10 years, there's still lots of question mark with guys in their top 10. Obviously, Schaefer injury, Frondell, is he going to drive the play 5-on-5? He's playing better, but he's still, I don't know if he's really driving the play 5-on-5 yet. Carter Bear's production is going down a bit in Everett. We still love him, but that's something to monitor for the end of the season and the playoff for him. McQueen, when is he going to coming back? When is he coming back to play? Because we need some games. Because he only played 8 games this season, so we need to see him. And the other guys with question mark. Ryabkin and Muskegon, very, very tough player, honestly, to scout and to project. There's some really good things about him, and there's also some other things where we're scratching our head about. So I feel like this is like a common theme for the draft, and also the depth of the draft. It's not that that good. This players there, like in every draft, you can find some guys in the second, third, fourth round. Like good teams will have those guys. But there's not that many. There's, as Brad mentioned, maybe a few more than we thought from maybe 2 months ago, 3 months ago, where we were really down on the depth of the draft. Like now, maybe some guys are, showing, some interesting potential from the second round, third round, fourth round. But let's not kid ourselves. This is not a great draft. So teams that are having, like I was looking at some NHL teams that have a lot of second round picks, third round picks, fourth round picks in the draft. I wonder what they're going to do. I feel like I have a feeling a lot of teams are going to try to move up in the draft, trade a lot of draft picks to move up because I feel like it's a draft like this is more about quality than quantity. So it's going to be interesting to see. Brad, we're going to talk about 4 players in this podcast, and then we're going to answer some questions on the last segment of the pod. So the 4 players we're going to talk about are 4 players that have made some really good progress this season and have moved up on this list. The 4 of them are in our top 32. So Brad, let's start with Radim Mrtka out of Seattle, Czech defenseman who has made quite an entrance to the WHL since coming over in December. We were a pretty big fan of him coming into the season, but I feel like coming to the WHL was honestly like really the best decision you can make. His ice time and usage in Czech this season was really up and down, and it was not getting better. It was actually the opposite, which is getting worse and worse as far as ice time. And he's been honestly lights out in Seattle, not playing not on a good team, but he's doing really well. I think he's a point per game player now, and as a defenseman, that's pretty impressive, and not really a defenseman that we think, as a really high-end offensive player. We think about his defense first, but then the fact that he's a point per game player, that is really interesting. And defensively, even on a bad team, he has been really solid for Seattle. So, Brad, I'll let you give your 2 cents on Radim Mrtka.
When we were scouting him out of Ocellarii, very raw, unpolished, but certainly interesting because so pacey. Love how 6'6" right shot defenseman with pace. I'll take that all day. It's just where we ultimately had to wait to figure him out was in our more limited viewings. He's not playing a ton when he was up in Czechia. And he was keeping things very simplified, which a lot of kids, first year eligible, are going to do when they get up to the pro level. What we've seen that's really changed the dynamic of our ranking with him is the technical playmaking ability. Way more efficient, cleaner, and in terms of like the ability to make more difficult passes, he's starting to really show a consistency there. He can feather pucks. He can sauce pucks through layers. He can stretch the length of the ice now. He can one-touch process pucks up the ice. So it gives him the dynamic now where he can pass the puck or he can use that 6'6" frame and skate and just carry the puck out because he's actually got decent hands. Like I would argue Jerome probably at the same level as Kirill Zinkov at the same age. And the Dozer's coming alive now. The Dozer's really starting to showcase the hands in the KHL now. So if you look at the trajectory, it's starting to really head in the right direction. And if you compare him to, say, Matthew Schaefer, for instance, okay, these are 2 top D. What you see is what you get primarily with Schaefer's handling ability. Now, he's younger, so there's still going to be another level of development most likely because he is one of the youngest defensemen in this class. But Mrtka, what you have to do is you have to take consideration the length of him. At 6'6", there's no chance he's done with the development of his physical coordination. That means another uptick with everything when it comes to how smooth he is with the puck on his stick and how he can chain players together and create sequences. So that's what we're betting on. There's definitely still room for improvement, But we think much like another comp to a big player that I mentioned him on this pod. I hope you guys listen. I told you Elmer Soderblom isn't done. I told you all that he was going to come back from the dead, and here he is to stay. So the Blom, he has learned that he's got to actually use his frame correctly to stick. Mrtka's not there yet. Mrtka uses his pressure and his pace to uses his pace so he can pressure the opposing teams. What he's going to have to learn to do is cut through different players using his frame, overwhelm them, and he has not learned to do that yet. So that's the next stage of his evolution. Not mean, not overly physical, but he'll box out. And again, very, very pressure oriented and keeps a high pace of play, which is, again, very rare. Like, Jerome, when's the last time we've seen a defenseman that size with that conditioning? That's a pretty rare level, right?
Well,
so
I was gonna say, like, we're talking about player comp. Simashev back in 2023 was big, mobile, underrated ends like Mrtka has. Simon Edvinsson was a bit like that too, 6'6", with really underrated ends that nobody talked about. Everyone thought he was dumb and not that talented. We thought Edvinsson was going to be a monster when give him time to, because he was really raw like Mrtka physically. And look at him with the Red Wings this year. He's been arguably their second best defenseman after Sider.
I mean, he's had games where he is straight up better than Sider.
Yeah,
he really has. So that tells you everything you need to know about his development.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if Mrtka is going to be as good as Edvinsson. Simashev, we'll see once he come over, but Mrtka is not as good of a skater as Simashev for sure, but it's fine.
Edvinsson.
Yeah, exactly. Edvinsson. I mean,
but bigger, so it'll take more time.
Yeah,
it takes more time for larger players to get depth within their stride, because the deeper they go, the easier it is for them to go off balance, right? So that's the issue there. It's like, again, more raw, everyone. That's the thing. It's a bit more raw, but that doesn't mean, we scout for the finished product, and we're thinking of him at 24, 25, and that's when we get really excited.
I think of him come playoff hockey, and you have a right D that can defend like he does. He covers so much space on the ice with, obviously, his skating is fine, but he just has like those long stride that those long legs. He covers a lot of ice. He's got a really good stick. He blocks shots like a lot of times on the PK. So you look at to project his defensive game come NHL playoff, come in like 3, 4, 5 years. I think NHL team will be all over this guy come draft day. I think they're really gonna like the fact that he came over. A lot more easier for NHL team to get a great read on him playing 30 minutes a night with Seattle instead of playing 10 minutes a night in Czechia. And good news, I don't think Seattle will make the playoff in the WHL, so that means he's gonna go to Dallas for the U18. So that's gonna be a big time showing for him over there. So he's number 6 for us, and I don't know, like, depending on what happens in front of him, maybe he still can keep rising on the for our final rankings, depending of like what happens with the guys in front of him, and if he continued to play great and has a great showing at the U18, maybe he does move up in that top 5 group. Really interesting player. Like, honestly, like, I saw him at the U17 last year. I was right there. I said, this guy's a top 15 pick. And then I see him at the Olympia, and I'm like, okay, this guy's a top 10 pick. And then he goes back to Czechia, and then I got confused because the lack of playing time. And Brad, you mentioned the playmaking from him. That was the big question mark. It reminds me so much of Stanislav Svozil, who was in Czechia when he was in the Czechia league at 16, 17. His draft year, you and I watched him a lot, to try to figure out his passing skills, and they were a lot of hit and miss from him. And then he goes to the WHL the year after, and his playmaking is so much better. Like, the accuracy of his passing was so much better, and it's almost the same thing with Mrtka happened. We had some question about him watching him in Czechets this season with his passing skills, and he goes with Seattle, and there's no more question. He's got a really good first pass, so it's I don't I don't really have a really smart explanation for that. I just think the Czech league is really tough for any 16, 17 years old to play in. And maybe, I think other than maybe David Jiricek and Kulich, even Kulich was not perfect, honestly, because honestly, if there's no U18 tournament, where he really exploded over there at the U18 tournament, I don't know if we had really a good read on Coolidge in his draft year.
I don't think anybody did. Well, the U18s, he's not getting half.
So yeah, it's really hard to scout players in that league. I think it's one of probably the more underrated league in Europe. It's easy. I would say it's the most physical league in Europe. Like it's really hard to play in that league. So it's for like a 17 years old in his draft year. It's probably not the best thing. We saw it with Radim Mrtka last year. It was really a struggle for him to play in that league, and kind of saw it with Mrtka. But Mrtka made a really good decision to move to Seattle. We're gonna move on to our second player. We're gonna stay with another defenseman, Brad, but this time we go to Russia with Kurban Limatov. We actually talked about Limatov in the earlier podcast. I would say back in October, and I remember I said I can't wait to see what this player looks like in February. Well, here we are. He's 22nd on our list, so he's one of the big riser from our ranking. He was in our November ranking, he was 33. So he moves up from 11th spot. So Brad, Limatov, what do you have? What do you have on him?
Well, to your point, we couldn't wait to see what he would start developing into, because there's just so many tools. So 6'4", 200 plus pounds, and Simon Edmondson kind of had the similar looking frame, weight, height, but there was one massive difference between the two, and that's that Edmondson was raw physically and needed a lot of time with his static strength and power to catch up to him. Kurban Limatov, when he gets hit, you don't worry about him. You worry about the person who tried to hit him. He's a mutant. This kid is a monster on the ice, physically extremely developed, very unpolished. But that's where we're getting really excited now, because we're starting to see finally what the player can emerge and develop into long term, which we think is a 200-foot force of nature that does a bit of everything for you. So, before. I always use this quote in the Black Book. I'll use it right now for all of you. It's that Forrest Gump quote. It's life is a box of chocolates. You don't know what you're going to get. When he touches a puck, you don't know what chocolate you're getting. He can do anything. He can just do blind swing passes directly to the opposing team, completely stand stationary and miss his assignment, get caught flat-footed, trip up the opposing player, end up in the box. He can rush a puck up the ice, go through three layers with hands you couldn't believe he had, and end up doing something that looks like a miracle. So he's all over. So I remember the last time we talked about him, Jerome, the one thing I stated was there was a whole lot to work with, but he has no idea how to operate in a way that will actually be successful when you scale him up to the NHL. Now, I know you're in agreement with me on this. We watched them together. We're starting to see a player emerge and starting to figure it out. He's starting to unlock the keys. He's starting to understand how to get behind the wheel and go into cruise control with the puck, and starting to make effortless high-end plays a lot more consistently for us. The other knock on this kid was like the hockey sense component. It's like, where is he? It's like almost like Zhao Wang. Like, what are we dealing with? What is the hockey sense on this kid? Well, with Limatov now, we're starting to see adaptive processing under the forecheck, where he can get the puck off his stick in the right amount of time to the right player in transition. Not not getting overwhelmed when it comes to behind his goal line with the forecheck as often, not getting overwhelmed with his decision making when he's puck rushing in the neutral zone, and especially at the offensive line, I would say that might be even the most emerging property of him in terms of where he was to where he is now. Where before, honestly, it reminded me of what's the dub defender that everybody's overranking on us, and either we're wrong
Blake Fiddler.
Blake Fiddler. So Blake Fiddler, when he touches a puck, there are times where he still has no idea he's supposed to be a defenseman, right? That was kind of Limatov. Limatov had that element too, where it's like, let's be a power forward on this shift. Now Limatov's starting to understand how to use his skating and handling combination to manipulate a line correctly. And when he breaks down the first layer, he's starting to make plays that are the most optimal for him. That was missing. That was a huge component that was missing. So he's starting to put everything together, is what I'm trying to say. Is there still growth there? Oh, so much. Like, he's still caught flat-footed too often, still puts himself out of position occasionally where, like, what is he doing? And occasionally he'll throw the most ridiculous like spinning blind pass right up the middle for no reason and leave you wondering what happened because he was having a good shift and decided to ruin it for himself. So there's some of that. But taking that into account, we're seeing a whole lot of good, a whole lot of phenomenal gifts within him. Is one of those giant Kinder eggs where it's like, oh, this is a massive one. Let's crack it open. You got the giant egg. You don't know what's in it. That's kind of like Kurban Limatov to me right now.
Yeah, he's still risky, but a lot less than he was in October. So we see the progression there. I mean, if he was as risky as he was in October, I don't think he'd be ranked 22nd on our list. Like, we see progression in his game. That's why we keep watching those guys. What you want to see, like if they improve or not. If they don't, well, usually they go down on our list. And in Limatov's case, he's definitely a riser for us. And you look at the defensemen around him, Logan Ensler, Keishan Atchison. Like, I really think he fits with those guys. Right now he's behind those two, but we'll see if his team can have a deep run in the playoff in the MHL that could just to get as much game as possible from him that we can watch. Obviously, they won't be a U18 tournament for Russia this season, but so he's an interesting one. Really good athlete. We love those kind of defensemen for the past few years. Like, every year and often in Russia, to be honest, like Silyadiev last year, Simashev. We like those big, athletic defensemen out of Russia. And Limatov is another example of that. Brad, let's move on to the USHL. We got two players here. We'll start with Vaclav Nestrasil out of Muskegon. Big power forward, 6'5", still really raw. He did had a very slow start of the year, not just stats wise, but the way he played. And then I don't know, something kind of clicked for him at some point, and he started really playing a really physical game. And that kind of changed. Like, we often talk about players that turn the corner. I feel like when he kind of realized that I need to be that really physical player, I think things start clicking for him. And then he had a stretch of, I think he was a point per game player for he had a sequence of 22 games, 22 points. And then you look at, well, he's 6'5". He's probably going to play at 220 when he's 23, 24 years old. And the skating is okay. It's not. It's point A to point B is fine, but it's not the most beautiful stride, I would say, Brad. It's pretty rigid. But we really like it. Yeah, we really like the playmaking from. And when you have a big power playmaker, like it really speaks to us. We really love those players. So we love, again, we mentioned with Limatov, we saw the progression happening with him over his hockey sense. And for Nestrasil was not really about the hockey sense. It was more about playing a much more physical game, and everything kind of like, you know, um, everything everything came together after that. So Brad, I'll let you give your 2 cents on Vaclav Nestrasil.
Well, he's reminded me of like a 6'5.5" Martin Pospisil, and that's incredibly useful. Like Calgary Flame fans out there, it's not all about just production. It's the racing element. It's the physicality. It's what now Pospisil's a better skater, better mechanically at the same age, but Pospisil made his line better, and he could really pass the puck too. He's good vision, smart, not the most dynamic player. That's where I would argue Nestrasil might be ahead of Pospisil in terms of actual offensive ceiling by a bit. But then Pospisil's ahead of him in skating, and then Nestrasil's bigger. That's kind of how I'm looking at it right now. Got to definitely watch more down the stretch. But to Jerome's point, this does come with some bias. My favorite player type is a power playmaker. They're incredibly useful when they hit. When they hit, they just make lines so much better. Like Dmitry Voronkov out of Columbus this season. He's the third man on the line was Monahan and Marchenko, who's like turned into a literal star player now, who, thank God, we got one right in 2018, Jerome, not many, but Marchenko is one of them. But with Ventili and Marchenko there, it's Voronkov's job to be the eraser, not the eraser. He's not a big physical presence right now, but he's still, he makes the opposition second guess themselves. He's very difficult to contain, and he can make a lot of plays down low off the walls. That's kind of the same type of trajectory we have with this player. Nestrasil is going to make a lot of plays off the walls. He's going to be able to work down low off the forecheck. He's going to be very dangerous net front. Again, to what Jerome just mentioned with the curve, like this player was kind of not understanding what he could be. And that's what happens sometimes in drafts with these larger players. They need more time to develop. They don't always know how they can take games over. Look how long it took Tage Thompson, Elmer Soderblom to get going. It took them time. There's other players that it just takes them a lot more time. What's out of Washington? The Belarusian out of Washington, Jerome?
Protas.
The Protas brothers. Look at the Protas brothers, right? He's got everything. He's got everything he needs, and he just figured out mid-season, and that makes it so much easier on us because, like Kieran Walton, for instance, we're the highest on him. We had him the highest ranked. Anybody would talk to me behind the scenes, I said that's one of the late kids for me, where he could be a steal of the draft type of thing. Obviously, I think the Jets are pretty happy with what they have right now. But Kieran Walton never figured it out at the end of the season. He didn't know what he could be, and he didn't know how to work, and he was losing his minutes and his ice time. And so that puts us at a disadvantage because we have to go back to the drawing board and say that's way too many variables. Now we got to decrease his percentage likelihood that he figures it out. We got to put him lower on the draft board. So with Nestrasil, the reason we're being so aggressive is because now with that new information we have, we can definitively define what type of player he can be and what he's showing. That's the difference.
You mentioned Washington. You mentioned the Protas brother. Like one is doing extremely well in the NHL. The other one is doing extremely well in the OHL. They also drafted Eric Smatiko last year. Similar profile. Big 6'5" winger. Who's now playing for Rimouski, but was great for Latvia at the U20. So I think I said it privately, but I'm going to say it on the podcast. My prediction: this kid is getting drafted by Washington. So we're actually like off air talking, me and Brad. We might do a podcast or at least a segment where we predict which player will get picked by which team. So we have done this privately in the past few years, and we might start at least have a segment about this before the draft, like somewhere in June, where we we scout players, but we also scout teams. Which team likes what type of player? So it's always pretty fun, and sometimes we get it right. Obviously, it's very tough to get exactly the guy they want at the draft, but we can see some patterns in how some teams draft. So that's my first take. Nestrasil will be a Washington Capitals on draft day, and if I'm right, I will bring back this clip on Twitter on draft day.
Well, sometimes we got to be careful too, Jerome. I was talking to one player development coach on a team, and we were going back and forth. And I told him how I think his team has certain tendencies. It was like specifically skating and looking for skating and players that can drive possession through the neutral zone. And he like fundamentally disagreed with me. He was like, "What are you talking about?" Believe me, not all teams are going to be in agreement with what we're talking about, but we do try to do it. I think there is definitely some team tendencies to focus on. It'd be a lot of fun for all of you to listen to. Because
Honestly,
we do get a bit more behind the scenes take than on most people publicly, right? So it gives us some info.
yeah, I mean, it's not really for the first round guys. It's mostly like we often do it for like second round guy, third round guys, fourth round guys. And obviously, like we more often we're wrong on this, but sometimes we get it right on some players. So it could be a fun segment to do later in the year. And let's speaking of fun, let's talk about Ryker Lee out of Madison. Really fun player to scout and to watch. Brad, you were really high on him really early on this season. Let's talk about give us your thoughts on Ryker Lee, who's having a really strong season with Madison. Madison, not really well known for developing, first round picks in the NHL draft.
Yeah, this one's tricky for me, Jerome, because we just talked about Nestrasil with this my biases for power playmakers. Like this is a bias for me too, because this is my favorite player in the draft. Like there's two players, we haven't talked about. We'll talk about the other one on a future segment for sure. But this player for me is like the most dynamic, under the radar, underrated talent in this entire class. I like what he can do with the puck and how he generates offense. Like Cullen Potter can't touch him. The difference is that Potter has a phenomenal toolkit. Potter can really skate, super pacey, starting to really develop that secondary skill set off the puck. He's showing better defensive ability, better support, starting to understand leverage mechanics and how to take advantage of his smaller frame when it comes to contact. So Potter has him beat there. Potter's definitely the safer bet, definitely can skate way better. But Ryker Lee, how Ryker Lee generates his offense, it's not debatable. Ryker Lee has the best hands in this class. That includes the top of the top. It's not close. And because of those hands, he can set up plays that just basically no other prospect can. And when it comes to his theory, like how he thinks the game offensively, it is as dynamic and as elite as it gets. So I always talk about forwards that can make double or triple option play scenarios for themselves. So it makes it very difficult for the goalie to understand how the offense is going to be generated. That's Ryker Lee's bread and butter. He can set up so much manipulation through his handling and off puck feints and off looks that it just makes defenses just simply not understand what he's going to do with the puck. And he's brilliant at dynamically setting up the most optimal and most efficient play. Some of these player types, for instance, like Nils Hoglander is an example of this brilliant, dynamic talent, smaller, phenomenal set of hands in his draft class. We were high on him. But the problem with the Hoglander, and it's still a problem, is that his game needed to be streamlined because there would be times where he was way more inefficient when it comes to trying to find the highest percentage option and the most dangerous option. Sometimes his creativity would get a hold of him and be used against him. That's not occurring with Ryker Lee most of the time. Ryker Lee understands that when he's in a high danger spot, it's time to take advantage of that instead of being overly creative or overly reliant on those hands. That's why I'm so bullish on him right now. And the other reason is that the skating's coming along. This kid was not a very good skater, especially when you take into size consideration. Not fast twitch at his size, which is incredibly dangerous. Very few players at 5'10" without fast twitch at this age really make it. So this is where we bet against the odds a bit, but I think the reason he can still make it is because his talent level is so high that it will allow him to slow down defenses so he can compensate for the skating if it doesn't come to the level we're hoping for.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like my last few viewings, I thought the skating looked a bit better than what it did in October, November. Also thought the compete was a bit better because I remember my first set of viewings on him, I was like, Brad, I don't know, like can't skate, can't skate. Is very passive on the ice. So I was like, I don't know. But then the more you watch, the more you can appreciate. Obviously, the talent level it's pretty high hand. Obviously, like you have to be blind to not see how good he is one on one, and um, we can talk about his shot, but his playmaking is like really underrated. He makes player around him better. He was, I believe, he was named best player at the USA Top Prospect game. I think he got hurt a bit at the Junior A Challenge, so he didn't really have the chance to, really play. I don't think he played all the games, and I don't think he was like a big factor over there because of the injury. But he's a really good player. Still a bit of a boom bust type prospect, but in this draft, like where we ranked him, like there's a ton. I feel like in 6-7 years when you and I are still doing this podcast or not, uh, we're gonna talk about this draft. Like, yeah, this guy missed, this guy missed, this guy missed. So when you have a guy who's got legit top talent, you have to rank him. Even though there's some, I wouldn't call them red flags, but some flag there that he's gonna need to address. But he's been lights out in the USHL. Also, big improvement in the second half of the season. I was just looking at some stats today, and his point per game ratio in the second half much better than the first half. So you can see the curve is happening. Not only for us scout with what we see on the ice, but stats wise, it's also improving. So that's really a good sign for him. So we are at the end here for our last segment. So Brad and I did ask some people about sending some questions on Twitter when we released the list. So just guys, bear with me. I'll just set this up here. But we had a few questions. I'm gonna add this here. Um, First question here that I have is from Matt, who's a Ducks fan. Um, for this upcoming draft, which player do you most disagree with each other? That's a good one. I think me and Brad do have somewhat this same scouting philosophy, so it doesn't happen a lot of, at least for like top 32 guys, that we are in huge disagreement. Um, so I would say maybe the player right now that we have somewhat of a disagreement is Ben Kendall, that we rank 25 out of Calgary. But also, there's also a different factor that can explain that. Number of viewings we get on the players. Um, come come June, it's usually pretty equal on at least the top guys. But during the season, sometime I will have more viewings on one player, and Brad will have less, and sometimes vice versa. Brad will have more viewings on one guy, and I have less. So on this case, Kendall, I do have more viewings on him than Brad, so I'm a bit higher on him right now. But I do, I do understand what. Well, obviously, you guys have not heard it because it was a private discussion, but I understand some of the concern that Brad could have on Kindle because he's not a big guy. He's not a really fantastic skater. So those guys are a bit sometimes. Um, there's some concern about guys like that. Sometimes they're gonna end up being Claude Giroux, and sometimes they end up being some random guys you guys have never heard of that plays in junior, plays a bit in American Hockey League, end up playing in the Swiss League, and then we often call those guys like good juniors. So there's a very thin limit here, like a very thin line between um, those players succeeding and not succeeding. So the more I watch Kendall, the more I think he's going to succeed. but I mean, we have. I think Calgary will go pretty deep in the playoff. They made some trade. They got Tanner Howe. They still have Yakinchuk on the team. Kendall is just pretty much every game he's getting 2 points at this point. Over the course of the season, like he's been pretty consistent, game in and game out. But yeah, I guess that would explain a bit the difference of opinion we have on Kindle. Maybe Brad, you want to add something here?
I mean, I still like him. You like him a bit more, but I still like him. I don't hate Kindle just yet, but I would say there's a couple that are like more contrasting than Kindle. Will Moore, for sure. I'm not a big Will Moore fan.
Mm.
I would say, like, yes, he's played better. His play has improved, but I am nowhere near as high as like most of the industry, and I would say our own staff is. And the other one, this is the biggest one, I think, Jerome, is Sasha Boumediene. I think Boumediene is probably the biggest one. I have Boumediene relatively high still. I think there's more untapped ability there, and I've been much happier with his play the last month, from what I've seen. So I would say it's probably the biggest contrast right now. But to Jerome's point, like the way we think the game, the way we discuss it, look at it, is pretty darn similar. Sometimes to the point where we're a bit worried. With any staff, there's a bit of groupthink that can really come in and catch up to you, and you got to be very careful. You got to make sure that you can counteract each other and try to eliminate as many biases as possible for the actual ranking. So, but yeah, for the most part, it's pretty rare for Jerome and myself to actually disagree on a top end talent, especially like right up at the top, like top 12, 13, 14 names. It is very uncommon for us to not be in agreement. Usually after that, there's definitely some back and forth. But like, for instance, I remember Jerome, one of the big ones for me was Pelche in the Quebec. I remember I was really fighting him in the draft. I really didn't like him. I'm ironically reminds me a little bit of Kindell, so maybe that's part of it. Though I like Kindell more than Pelche at the same age. I think Kindell's more dynamic, and there's more there. But I'll give Pelche this. He's at least he's had a decent year. I mean, he ended up getting traded, but he got traded for reasons because Philly, I think, wanted him because he was pretty good. He's pretty decent Calgary there. So maybe I'm wrong on that one after all, and you got that one on me. But yeah, we agree a lot on the same, basically every style of player, how we look at them, how we evaluate them. It's just kind of certain trajectories in terms of upside. Sometimes we have a disagreement with, and especially I'd say like third pairing to second pairing defenseman, which again, Sasha Boumediene. So that's where we differ a little bit.
Yeah, I'll say this, and it's the exact same explanation on Kendall. Is you have more viewings on him than I do. So
yeah, absolutely.
So maybe when I catch up to you on Boumediene, I'll be in the same range as you on him. But that's what happened often during the year, where we're trying to watch as many players as possible. But sometimes like we don't have the same number of viewings on each guy. So if Brad has like seen a guy 5-6 times more than me, and he's been really good in those 5-6 games, and also Boumediene, like those freshmen in college hockey that are draft eligible, they are hard to scout unless they're Macklin Severini. They really are hard to get a really good read on. Colin Potter's another one. I remember Dylan Ottaway in his draft year at Wisconsin, where we were just scratching our head trying to.
Part of that was coaching, though. That was nightmare coaching too. That really didn't help us. It was like, oh my god, because we liked him out of the AJHL, and it was like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do with this?
Yeah. All right. Second question. Never mind the typo here, but can Eklund pass Hagens? Again, never mind the typo here, but that's an interesting one, Brad. I mean, nothing is impossible, but the fact that I don't know if he means for our rankings or for the actual NHL draft order, but I'd be surprised if a winger goes like Eklund would go over Hagens. I know Hagens is not having like this fantastic Again, freshman season in college hockey, but he's there's a lot of good things with this player, and he did well at the U20. He showed some really high end playmaking. Um, at the same time, Eklund also is really he's a very good playmaker, very high end playmaking. He's a better skater than Hagens. Hey, what happens if we move Eklund to center? does that change the dynamic of this question? Because we just before we start recording, we did talk about what happens if Eklund's a center. Although he's pretty small to be a center at the NHL level right now, so it will take a few years. But even like I look at his brother, his brother is still quite small, so it's tough to play at the NHL down the middle at that size. But it's an interesting question. It's impossible to watch Eklund without liking him. Like he's almost like Carter Bear with more speed and less physicality, but he's not afraid. He's just smaller than Carter Bear. But I don't know. What do you think, Brad?
I think it's a pretty interesting question. So I'll answer from this perspective immediately. Does he go ahead of him on draft day? No, that won't be happening. I'd be shocked. I'd be shocked if Hagens doesn't go before Eklund on draft day. That said, redraft, could it switch? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And are they in a similar tier range? Absolutely. Well, I won't be shocked here if Hagens ends up in a Shane Wright situation where projected one going in ends up going third, fourth, fifth type of thing. Wouldn't be shocked whatsoever. There's a lot of competition there. Depending on who you talk to, you're going to get very different. I guarantee you there's a team out there that has Radim Mrtka too. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. 6'6" right shot defenseman with the pace, conditioning, and what he's showing in the dub. Some team is going to say, you do not find those players outside the draft. You do not find them. So if a team has natural center depth, and I know a lot of you are like, what about BPA? BPA is not real. I will say this to all of you over and over. Like, BPA is not a real thing. Like, yes, okay, Macklin Celebrini, it's BPA. There's so much internal debate among staffs, among everybody who actually really does this. So like one thing with online scouting, like this is where it gets a bit fraudulent, is like most people don't watch nearly to the degree they claim they do, especially if they're independent. If it's not a team-oriented staff, like we're lucky, we have a team. So to Jerome's point, Jerome can be hanging around the CHL. I'm off sweeping Europe for 2 months. I can come back to Jerome, give him 8 or 9 new players. Now Jerome knows what to watch for the next month. He's caught up. If you're independent, you're solo, you can't do any of that. It's absolute nonsense. We know this because we're never going to be the best scouts or anything like that. But the one thing we can always tell all of you that listen to this, we actually watch what we say we watch, and it's the point of lunacy. We scout more than most people on this earth. We really do. So it's almost situations where when people say, "Oh, BPA and tier," like most people don't know the drafts. Like very few people independently can tell you what this draft actually is. So going back to Hagens on my rant, Hagens is very good, but yes, the Shane Wright fall could happen. Some team could have Eklund above him theoretically, but I doubt it. But if Eklund could be a center, and stranger things have happened than Eklund developing as a potential center, he's got more of a nastiness to him than his brother. Like the biggest difference between William and him is that Victor really can get underneath players, agitate them. There's a bit of that vinegar factor to him in his blood, and you need that if you're going to be a center at that size. So that's where it's difficult to really assess it, because if he can be a center, it gets really interesting really quickly.
Yeah. We're going to move on to the third question here. Yeah, another one to make you rant, Brad.
Doesn't take much.
What tiers would you include these players in? Is it Schaefer and then 2, 3, 4, 5? Speaking of our top 5, Schaefer, Misa, Hagens, Frundell, Martin. So, Brad, let me hear you. What do you think about tiers? And please answer this question.
I think. Okay, let's So, some of you out there, I'm not going to name his name. He seems like a great guy. I'm not going to try to pick fights, but there's a couple scouts out there that love to pretend there's these bubble deluxe tier systems, and you move players within these tier ranges. And tier ranges are ridiculous. They're ridiculous. And I hear this from NHL staff. So I'll talk to somebody at the NHL level, and they'll be like, well, I think there's like a good 15, then there's a real fall. And it's like, no, I couldn't disagree more with that. It's just not how drafts end up working out. It's incredibly rare for tier ranges to hold in a draft. And when you take in hindsight, it's ridiculous. And hindsight, one thing about being an actual scout relative to before I was scouting, I would watch players at the junior level at U20 or U18s. I'd still watch players internationally, and I would in my head, this is where I had that player, and oh yeah, I can do this. And man, hindsight is so powerful. When you're really in it, it's unbelievably powerful. When you look at tier ranges and take hindsight into consideration, it's just that there's really no such thing as a tier range, and there's no BPA. So what the new NHL is you can't trade for certain player types. So that's why there's no BPA, and it's like, for instance, if a team needs a massive mobile defenseman, it doesn't matter if they even think Hagens is slightly better than Mrtka. They're going to take Mrtka. We have seen, Moritz Seider was not just taken as a BPA. It's because Detroit desperately needed that player type. Same thing with Simon Edvinsson. It's just not how the industry really works anymore. Maybe it will change because the cap's going up. Maybe that changes some things. Maybe teams are going to be more open and willing to trade higher end assets as a result of the cap. We'll see. But yeah, let's play the game anyways. I think the tier range is those 5 and Mrtka. Those would be the big 6 to me in this class right now. And we'll see how comically wrong that is in a redraft. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm going to answer the question, I'll say Schaefer is in his own tier. I still think he's my number 1 guy, and I don't think I'll move him. And then I feel like after that, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think will be even Mrtka 6 in their own in their own range here. So all right, next question. I knew that question you would love that question, Brad. I know you so well. Next question. Saying I want to thank WGC Rankings, because he sent WGC Rankings. He sent us 2 questions, so appreciate you. And he's also, I follow him on Twitter. He's the biggest Anton Frondel fan on Twitter, so shout out to you. His question. Oh, that's the same question. Hold on. I know he asked another question. Let me find it. All right, that's a good one. What are the odds of Matthew Schaefer not going first overall on draft night? We're not betting, man. Wink, wink. But that's actually a really good question, because I honestly really believe Matthew Schaefer is the number 1 guy. But depending, I really think it will depend who gets the number 1 pick. If Chicago gets the number 1 pick, are they going Schaefer? Because I feel like Connor Bedard is screaming and yelling and kicking. It's give me someone to play with. Give me someone to play with me on my line, because he's got no help. I mean, Frank Nazar is there. They do need. I mean, we said it last year. They need forward with size, because their prospect pool is really small. Bedard is 5'9", 5'10", Nazar 5'10", Oliver Moore not a huge guy. They did get Sacha Boisvert last year, who has some size. Vanaker's got some size, but are those guys going to be top 6 forward? Probably not. They're probably going to be more third line, middle 6 guys. Chicago last year had the chance to take Demidov. They went with Levchinov. It's not looking too good right now for them. Montreal is really happy. Demidov dropped all the way to 5. So if Chicago would get the number 1 pick, I'm not as convinced Schaefer would go there. I think Chicago might be into Michael Misa, um, Roger McQueen. Who knows? If he comes back and he's lights out, I mean, he's exactly what they need. I mean, would they take him first overall? That would be a risky selection, just because that would be a huge surprise, and also the injury factor. Kind of saw it with Caden Lindstrom last year. Lindstrom has not played a game this season. He just started skating today. So the injury factor, depending on what really is wrong with McQueen, that's going to be very important. But Brad, what's your take on this bet here for Matthew Schaefer and going number 1?
I'm with you. I really do think Schaefer's the best player in this draft. And if you want to do tier ranges, yeah, he's in his own tier range. But again, when it comes to tier ranges, it really fades out quickly once you get past those top end guys. So yeah, Schaefer's the best player in this draft right now for us. But I stand by what I'm saying. Like BPA is really not a thing right now with this cap market. So it's really going to depend on the team. Obviously, if San Jose gets that pick, it's going to be Schaefer by. It's not even a question, right? It's done. So it's just the environment. It just depends on the team. But yeah, if I was a betting man, I would say Schaefer goes 1. I do. I would say Schaefer goes 1. Well, obviously that could change when he's coming back here. If he doesn't look the same as he did, maybe that changes some things again. We'll see. Because if Frondell starts driving possession in Allsvenskan, all bets are off, right? Like Frondell can go way higher than people can imagine if that kid starts driving play correctly. Like he theoretically should be able to drive play all the time. So we don't really know what's going on with it from a psychological perspective, but he's one could just jump right up out of nowhere. So we'll see. But yeah, Schaefer right now is 1.
I was going to say something, but I forgot. I'm getting old, Brad. All right. Last question, and we got that one pretty often. So it was about. Actually, it's not the last question. I know, Brad, you have a private question that came in just before we start recording. But let me just show this here. One of the main questions we got it in 2 languages also. So it was about Caleb Desnoyers. We have him 14, and a lot of people ask about why is he 14 when he's higher elsewhere, and obviously we don't really care what he's ranked elsewhere. We have never done that, and also the question was about him versus Carbonneau. What's the difference between the 2 players? I'll answer that, and maybe Brad, we can after that touch on why is he this low. He's still 14 best prospect, but okay. Carbonneau versus him. We feel Desnoyers. We feel Carbonneau is more dynamic offensively than Desnoyers. Shooting wise, the ends, and the finishing ability. The rest, we feel Desnoyers is a better player. He's a better playmaker, better two-way player, better compete. No. It's pretty equal compete because both guys do compete, but Desnoyers is a better two-way forward. He's a lot more safe as a prospect than Carbonneau. But so why are we ranking Carbonneau? Well, the ranking is it's not the Jérôme Bérubé ranking. It's not the Brad Allen ranking. We are a team. So there's some staff member like me and Brad that we are, team Desnoyers on this. And there's other staff member that are team Carbonneau on this. So, and we lost that debate, I guess. So, but we'll see in June. we'll see in June. Like we still have one more ranking to go here, and we're still gonna work on this come June. And so why is he so this low? So if you look at guys that are ranked above him, like we could literally have Desnoyers rank 8, 9 on the list come June. Because you look at guys in front of him, nobody's a superstar. So you look at, Jake O'Brien is a different beast, I guess, because his upside offensively, I think, is higher than Carbonell, but Desnoyers. The playmaking is, I think, is the best playmaker in the draft. So Desnoyers is a good playmaker, but then when you watch Jake O'Brien pass the puck in, I was gonna say Hamilton in Brentford, it's really special. Nick Lardis is going to score, I don't know, 70 goals, 75 goals this season. A lot of those goals are assists by Jake O'Brien. So one thing about Jake O'Brien, we'd like to see a bit more 5-on-5 production from him. So that's why he's 12 and not in our top 10. After that, you look at the forward, Brady Martin. You could easily depend, like someone tell me I have Desnoyers above Martin. I'm not gonna argue about that one. I guess for us right now, like my comparable for Martin is Sam Bennett. So those are really unique players that you really can't find often. Guys that have some skill, really smart, and really, really, really physical. And Martin is that. That's a bit why he's above Desnoyers for me. But it's really close. And then after that, so Desnoyers, we project Desnoyers as a center, even though he has not played as a center the last 3 months in Moncton. You have some wingers that are like William Eklund, Carter Bear. So depending on what happens in the rest of the season, you can make a case that Desnoyers could be ranked ahead of them just because he plays down the middle. Again, we're huge fan of Carter Bear and Victor Eklund. So for now, I think we kept those guys in our top 10. Obviously, McQueen is I guess the wild card on our rankings. Because he has not played, and he's a center and he's 6'6" and he skates like the wind. So there's a lot to like here. We kind of put him in the 8 or 9 spot in November, and in this ranking, we're just waiting for him to play some games to, so we can actually scout him. So Desnoyers is 14, but he could be 8 or 9 or 7 come June, or he could be 12. I really think this grouping here from, I guess 7 to 14, like you can move guys around. I could do a ranking next week, and my ranking could be a little bit different depending how some viewings go. So it's really close. So Brad, maybe your 2 cents on the Desnoyers ranking and why is it so low for us?
You covered a ton of it, so I'll keep it real short. The simple answer is that Desnoyers looks like a legitimate pro player that can control the middle, play center long term one day. Carbonell projects to always be a winger, and Carbonell, to me, there's a lot of risk, very similar to kind of Andrei Kuzmenko in terms of risk evaluation, and so that's where the give and take is. Now he is more dynamic though, which is why why they're in a similar range. The other thing I think it speaks to is that the depth of the first round is better than people think. I actually think the first round gets a bad rap compared to where it is right now. I think the top 17 in this class is very real, very real. It's the depth that we talked about earlier, the dramatic fall off that is plaguing this draft. But the top end, like if you're in the first round, you're going to get a good player. If you know what you're doing and you're with the team, you're going to get something.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm not as bullish as you on the first round. I still have some question mark. Um, but it's very tricky to rank guys in the. I feel like after our top six, I think. Um, and honestly, like how do you rank? Maybe it's another discussion we can have here, but we talk about our top six, but like, what happens with Frundell if he doesn't drive the play? You know, do we keep him in a top five spot? Um, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe he does drop if he doesn't start driving the play 5-on-5 for us. Like I love the player. I've been really bullish on him since last year. I actually thought he was better than James Hagens last year, but the injury at the end of the year kind of like you know put a break a bit on my willingness to rank him above Hagens in our June rankings from last year. Uh, so I just feel like I feel like after the top two, and I was not a big Misa guy at the start of the year. We did a podcast and we were just talking about the lack of drive, play driving. Uh, I feel like I have turned the corner on him, and I mean, he's up. He's going to finish the year with like what 65 goals and 130 points. So it's tough to. It's one of the best um, stats wise season from a draft eligible player that we've seen recently in the CHL. Like obviously Connor Bedard, but like one of the best that we have seen. But I feel like starting at number three, I feel like we're going to see some movement come our final list. I really believe that, and it's going to be an exciting 3 months, Brad. We have a lot of work. Can't wait to see our final list. I don't know what it's going to look like, but like I'm pretty happy with the list that we have. But our final list always this is like this is where we really work hard. Like we always work hard, but like the final 2-3 months before we release our final list and the book, this is crazy time for us. And I'm really excited to see what our final list gonna look like come early June. I know Brad, you had a last question from someone who sent you a text message, so I'll let you ask the question um, that you got.
Yeah, it was who in our top 32 do we think is the most likely to move up dramatically?
That's a good question.
It's a good question.
Uh, wow, that's a good question, and I don't really have an answer. Well, one guy that I do wonder about because he's got like legit top 10 skill. Actually, there's two guys. I think they're back to back on our list are Ryabkin and Lakovic. Um, I mean, in Ryabkin case, actually, I don't know if he's gonna move up, but I don't see him falling farther than where we have him. I believe he's 15 or 16 right now. I think yeah, he's 16. Malcolm Spence is 15. But this kid's got so much talent. We just need to figure out the work ethic with him, and that's the big concern I have. So if he can figure that out and has a great maybe end of the season and playoff run, um, I could see this kid move up if everything you know is in place. Um, because we had him as a top five pick to start the year. So he didn't lose his talent, that's for sure. His talent is still there. He still can pass the puck with the best of them. He still has this vicious style that we like. But then other times he looks extremely lazy on the ice and he doesn't move his feet. And I've never seen that. Honestly, like I can't remember a player that had this dirty side to him, like vicious, but then also is incredibly lazy at times. Like I've never seen that. And for Lakovic, I've been really hard on him as far as compete level, physical play. Um, I think at times he's a bit too soft. I'm not crazy about his finishing ability too. Like I feel like he's one of those guys that needs a lot of scoring chance to score. Um, but he's 6'4", he skates really well, can really pass the puck. So he just came back from an injury. He missed about a month and a half, I believe. So I have not watched him. So basically, the last time I watched him was probably late November. Like I think the CHL USA Top Prospect game was the last time I've watched him. He got hurt late December, so maybe that's a guy who does move up, but I don't know. That's a good question. Totally not prepared for this question, so I'm I'm trying to remember our rankings in my head, but yeah, maybe those two guys will be my pick for this.
Yeah, for myself, I think we've talked about them a lot here today. It's O'Brien and Desnoyers. Those are the two I think have the most likelihood to potentially skyrocket up our ranking here at the end, depending on what happens. If to what Jerome said, if O'Brien can really get going 5-on-5 by the end of the season, that'd be huge for us. He's reminded me a whole lot of Ken Johnson. They're not, there's some differences, but there's a lot of similarities too. And so Kent Johnson, I watch a lot of. I've watched his whole curve. And so that's giving me more confidence with O'Brien here. And then Desnoyers, again, on our staff, he is the most volatile prospect in terms of discussions because, yeah, he's all over the map in the rankings, but behind the scenes for us. But I think he has a chance to really move up as well. In terms of like secondary type of player, I mean, I hate to say it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's Will Moore. Maybe it's somebody that I've dropped off a cliff here. Maybe it's Blake Fiddler. Like I am not a fan of Will Moore, Blake Fiddler, Cameron Schmidt. There's not my type of players at all. But I have to be aware of the fact that they all bring some different packages to the table that matter. If Cameron Schmidt, like the big thing with Cameron Schmidt is he's got way too much Daniel Sprong in him right now. Super junior tendencies that he's got to start erasing. He's also the worst conditioned smaller forward I've ever seen. The problem with that is I don't think that's going to get fixed until the off season. So a lot of variables, but I mean, Schmidt has a tremendous amount of talent, and then Moore has some talent, and then Blake Fiddler, if he becomes a converted power forward, I'm going to bring it up one last time. Converted power forward for the Fiddlers. You hear me out. Hear me out. Give me a text. Call me anytime. I'll explain why he's a converted power forward. But yeah, those would be the big three. Maybe one of those actually ends up moving back up my ranking there, and I try to come on board.
Okay, we'll finish with this because you just mentioned Jake O'Brien, and for the record, we had him 6 overall or 7 overall coming into the year. So we believe in the player last year. Very slow start. I mean, I don't think he was really impressive at Telinka. Then his OHL start was very slow, and then he got going, and now he's a legit top 10 potential pick. But you mentioned Kent Johnson. I had another name in mind. Let me know what you think. Robert Thomas. Do you see?
I see what you're saying. 100%.
Yeah, playmaking wise, like Robert Thomas was
very similar
a hell of a playmaker with actually played for the Bulldogs, Hamilton and the London Knights too. So I always saw some similarity between those two players, similar size to not huge guys. And Robert Thomas is, he's having a pretty good NHL career so far. All right. Well, that will do it. We're already over an hour, almost an hour 15 minutes here before I edit this. So we're going to wrap this up. Brad, maybe I give you the last word here. What's coming up next for you and I guess for us at Hockey Prospect?
Oh, well, we got a lot of work ahead of us to try to get this in the right order. But I would say to any of you listening where your team is really trying to retool or rebuild, you got a lot of picks, all hope is not as lost as previously thought. That's the big takeaway for me the last couple months of getting to sweep and figure out what's there. Found a ton more than expected. The draft has thickened and deepened in the middle rounds, which has come as a surprise and a pleasant one. So you're still messed up if you're between rounds 5 and 7, but at least you get something there between 2, 3, 4 now, which was not looking the case. So I think this class very likely will be ahead of 2012 and 2019. So those are my closing thoughts so far on this class.
Well, thank you, Brad, and thanks everyone from watching. And we'll be back for another episode. I don't want to say next week because we've been struggling with our schedule the last few weeks. But we should be back next week. And I think we have maybe another goalie episode in the book. Not draft eligible goalie, but actually goalies that are already drafted. We might do some kind of like top 10 rankings of those drafted goalies. So I think for now that's the goal for the next episode. Hopefully, schedule wise, it works for us next week. We're gonna try hard, and then we'll talk to you guys when the next episode comes out. So thanks a lot, and we'll be back soon.
Take care, everyone.